The value of creativity for a business, especially when you're building a brand, is bringing inductive thinking. So AI, as a rule, is deductive thinking, is deducing what is the best solution for a problem based on this deductive algorithm that's been developed. But for me, it's not to get the answer, it's to do the deductive thinking. The way to get an inductive idea is to have human spirit. I think human creativity is sacred. The ability to have different people with different lived experiences coming up with ideas is how good creativity happens. That's how good teams operate. It's how those unexpected ideas come out, because different people collide together and bring their different experiences together. And that's where that inductive moment happens.
Well, you come to the Believe in Brand podcast because you want to hear from the greats. You want to hear stuff you can't hear anywhere else about the world of B2B branding. This episode delivers. This conversation is with James Hurst, one of the OGs of branding in the world of business. He comes from Design Studio. He was the global creative director of Pinterest. He was the head of brand design for a company you may have heard of called, Google. He then worked for Tinder as its creative director. In this conversation, I catch him when he's a partner and chief creative officer of Zag, an agency he became a founding member of. And right now, he's currently the VP Global Creative Director of HelloFresh, the meal kit company. So yeah, he's done a thing or two in the world of B2B branding. And I had the privilege of talking to him about all the things that really matter in this world that he's experienced firsthand. He goes through that whole journey, but also talks about what it means to be creative in the AI era and how, while it's accelerating branding and the ability to be creative, it's also quietly killing what makes us creative at the same time, bold ideas inside organizations and doing branding differently in a unique way. He has this signature motto, which is weirding the normal and normaling the weird, which is kind of James in a nutshell. And you'll have to hear him to see what I mean by that. He stresses the importance of not just copying or deriving your work from somewhere else, but really thinking of something completely different and new. And that's really the essence of what a brand is. It's new, it's unique. He has one of these careers that, the way he describes it, you couldn't have really planned it, but in hindsight, it's just wild how it played out. And it's just a treat to hear someone who's really been through it all, right? He's really been inside the four walls of the most important companies, making the most important strategic branding decisions. So you'll just have to hear it for yourself. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with James Hurst. Let's go. All right, James Hurst. Welcome to the Believe in Brand podcast. So happy that you're here. Can't wait to dive into all things brand. I love when I get to connect with a fellow brand nerd. So great to have you on the show.
Oh, Ari, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Happy to have you. My pleasure. We connected a little while ago when you were running creative at Tinder, and you have since become the chief creative officer at Zag, which I would love to get into in a bit. But you really have quite an awesome background in the world of creative, in the world of brand, one that you get to name drop some pretty special brands that you've been able to work on. Why don't you just take a bit to catch everyone up on your journey and how you got to where you are today?
All right, well, strap in. It's a long journey, and I tend to go long on answers. So I have worked in agencies for a really, really long time and grew up bouncing around lots of different types of agencies and fell into a branding agency. And the person that gave me the job, I used to run my own little studio called Cure Studio. And I was working with somebody called Nick Couch, who is the ECD company called Fig Tree. And we were working on some side hustle for him. And he said, you're not doing what you should be doing. You should be working in brand. And at that point in my life, I thought brands were just the logos and the color palette. And working with Nick, and then through Nick, I met the rest of the Fig Tree team. They really showed me what real brand thinking is, that to build a brand, you really have to understand the business, the dynamics of the business, what the business is, why the business is doing it, and how the business is doing it. And really good brand thinking is having the confidence and the acumen to help those businesses take divergent paths, to think often with more confidence about how they're going to operate. So the idea that the brand was the core of the operating system for businesses really, really seduced me. So I joined the team at Figtree, and one thing led to another. Before I knew it, a few years, maybe a decade passed, and I'd been working in agencies to build brands. And at some point, I was working for a company called Design Studio. They'd just delivered the rebrand for Airbnb, and their star was flying high, and everybody in one bit of the world wanted to talk to them. And that bit of the world was sunny San Francisco. And I was leading the team in London. We already had a team in San Francisco. I went out to sort of try to bring some of the London story into the San Francisco team and make sure that we were sort of building bridges with the ways that we were working. And it was just a rocket ship. There were a number of people that wanted to talk to us as a result of the work with Airbnb. And then we did a whole bunch of other work that was very, very high profile. And it just meant that it opened up a ton of doors. One of the things that I learned after about 2 years-ish of living in San Francisco is that this is a city where to make a really big impact, to sort of do the stuff that brand teams do, you actually can't do it from the outside very easily. Some people do it, but if you want to really wrangle with the operating system of the business, you've got to get inside the businesses to do it. So unlike in Europe, where people tend to, or certainly in my experience, tend to look to outside consultants to help them bring some of that thinking, I think the in-house culture here is much, much stronger. And so it was a really, really tough decision, but I decided to move in-house. I felt like Design Studio was in a really good spot. I was really proud of the work there. And I joined the team at Pinterest. Now I worked really closely with Ben and Evan, two of the founders, around how could we redefine the role of Pinterest and start to do that brand as operating system thinking, but from the inside of a business, to sort of see how you could use that thinking inside. And you could see that whilst you might throw 1,000 snowballs that didn't go anywhere, if one of them started to roll and pick up a bit of speed, it was intoxicating. It was really, really fantastic to see what you could do, the needles you could move, that you could change. Worked with some really, really fantastic human beings. And then it felt like we'd sort of defined what that creator landscape should look like for the brand. And I started to look around again, and amazingly, Google, this company that I'd had such admiration for growing up, I'd sort of seen all of the quirky Google stories, and Google were looking for a brand design. And I'm not entirely sure why they gave me the job, but they did. They gave me a run at it. And that was probably, back then, we were still talking about the world of AI. We're still using the word Bard inside of Google. I think ChatGPT became a thing once I was at Google. I can't remember. But, it was a totally different world, a simpler time.
What year is that?
2022, I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was November 22, I think, is when ChatGPT came out.
Yeah, so it was probably early 2022-ish, maybe 2021. Gee, I can't actually remember. And but one of the things that was super duper fascinating for that role was, my role was to work horizontally across all of the different brands within Google. So all the primary products that you associate with Google, and many of the products you might not associate with Google. And how do you manage a brand across this big old portfolio, manage brand equity across this big old portfolio, which was a real lucky, one of the best opportunities for someone that's a brand nerd to understand the dynamics of how that sort of stuff might work and how that stuff might sort of play around. And then a brand, and I actually worked with, I know, years and years ago. I feel like I was such a dinosaur now, but a really, really long time ago, I worked with Tinder when it was a much, much smaller idea. We helped them with some work at Design Studio when we were still working out how to use mobile phones in some respects to meet people, let alone meet people we might want to go on a date with. And they got in touch. They had hired someone who I'd pitched to a number of times. And I think maybe with the post-COVID whiplash, the idea of helping build a brand, connect people together and bring people together in real life was really, really intoxicating. And then I was sat in the Tinder chair and I realized that one of the things that I think is really, really true is that being in-house or being in an agency are both fantastic roles, but for very, very different reasons. Being in-house, if you want to make change, you have to have real resilience. You have to find different ways of how you're going to use your lots and lots of lateral thinking to convey your ideas, to get people to see the way that you might see the world and to commit to the change that you think might happen. It can be really, really tough, and you can have lots and lots of meetings to get to the meetings that actually make that change happen. But when that change happens, it's fantastic. It can feel really, really rewarding. And being in agencies, I realized, having spent a bunch of time in-house now, it's like sitting in the therapist chair. These brands walk through the door and they say, help, nobody loves us anymore. People aren't buying our stuff anymore. People are saying bad things about us on all of the ways that they might say bad things. Your job in the agency chair is to play the role of the therapist. And you might not get as deep, you might not spend as much time on the problem, but you're just giving people the tools to help themselves. You're giving people the tools to be the best version of themselves. And I miss that. I miss the sort of the quick twitch ability to go out and make that sort of change. So I think I was in England for something. I can't remember why I was in England. I was in England for something, and I spoke to somebody about that yearning to get back into the therapist chair. And they said, oh, you should go and speak to this company, Zag. Like, they're one of the few companies that might work for the way that your brain works. And couldn't believe it. It's such a fascinatingly interesting, relevant way of thinking about how do you use creative thinking to solve big business problems. So they are very much a growth consultancy. They help brands grow. They split their work from the really big corporations that we will have seen, the big global monolithic brands that have to work in different places and have all of those big brand problems, with startup ingenuity. They will work with, they'll invest their time in real early stage startups and help those startups grow and help develop those ventures into something that actually means something and is something really, really meaningful. And that context switching from the really, really big stuff to the really, really small idea stuff is a real draw for a brain like mine. Like, being able to sort of know how to navigate both of those, I think it makes you a better thinker, knowing how to do that. It is a really important reminder when you're talking to a smaller startup that they don't have the resources of the bigger companies. And the bigger companies, they tend not to have the appetite, the risk appetite, the need to take those risks. There, it's about shoring up what people think about that brand in some cases. I got really, really intoxicated that this company even existed. I'd had a go at trying to set up a business a little bit in that model that didn't go very well. I did it somewhere in probably 2023, I think, between Google and Tinder, and that was a terrible time to set up a creative agency. Anyway, but then seeing Zag in the ecosystem of agencies, and then the legacy of Zag. Zag was born out of BBH. It's actually an independent agency now, but it's got a very storied history of both the origin of it and the impact that it's had and the stuff that it's done. And I couldn't be happy with the decision. It's that feeling of putting on the therapist coat, being able to really, really meaningfully help businesses at a time of stress. Zag's got the credibility to do that, both because of the time that it's been around and both because of its impact that it's had on so many other businesses that give people a lot of reassurance that they should listen to the crazy idiot called James.
Wow. So that's all that you've done? Nothing more? Just those couple of stops?
All right. And since you are, obviously I've written a book and obviously I put out music when I've not done it, although I've been long promising to finish an EP for about a year. So if I put the message on the floor, I'll do that soon as well.
You and I both. It's funny how many of us brand people are also musicians. I've had a couple of other guests that are the guitar in the background that are closet musicians. So pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, there are so many little things there that are entire podcasts from what you just described. The two things that stand in my mind, especially with the recent headlines of Johnny Ive being acquired by OpenAI and everyone trying to philosophize of what that means about the role of creative and product design for the future, and what he's going to make the iPhone killer. And I do think the point you were making earlier of brand isn't this like bonus thing that helps people recognize you, or, oh, they're the purple, one. No, like you're an engine for what the business does, not what marketing does, not what the tagline on the billboard is. It's like the business runs through the very strategic decisions made for how you present yourselves, how people encounter you. That is, in a sense, like how everything's going to go. It's going to live or die by that interaction or that series of interactions. And that's really what brand people are trying to do, at least the way I've seen it. And I think what you're recognizing, I mean, you brought up brands like Airbnb and Pinterest and obviously Google, who understood, like, if we solve this problem, if we catch lightning in a bottle, like in this way, not just, by getting a bunch of deals, but like cracking some sort of code, like it all comes together, all of it. And, like Brian Chesky's been on plenty of podiums, talking about the importance of that for Airbnb. So it's great to hear it from the source.
It's interesting, isn't it? The Johnny Ive OpenAI thing. I'm really, really fascinated to see where that comes out and what happens. I was, unlike some people in our industry who have said all sorts of things about that acquisition, I was so thrilled as a creative person that creativity is being put at the center of one of the biggest conversations of what is going on in planet Earth right now. So in culture, wherever you are in the world, people are wrestling with the role of AI. One of the biggest frontier AI labs have just hired one of the most storied, most recognizable names within design. The role of creativity is at the center of this conversation. I think that's a really, really positive signal about the role of creative people and what creativity is. And who knows what the product's going to be? I certainly don't. But I do know that it's as a signal for the role of creative thinking. If I were in a progressive business that wanted to make sure that I was doing good stuff, hopefully I'd be looking around and saying, have I got the right creative brains in the room? Am I talking to the right creative people in the room who are going to make sure that we're really pushing? And there's a line that I use all the time about the value of creativity for a business, especially when you're building a brand, is bringing inductive thinking. So AI, as a rule, is deductive thinking, is deducing what is the best solution for a problem based on this deductive algorithm that's been developed. I mean, that's a very glib thing to say, and there are ways of sort of pushing that, and I teach a course on how to use AI to build aesthetic intelligence. I'm a real believer and a real advocate of the role of the tool, but for me, it's not to get the answer, it's to do the deductive thinking. The way to get an inductive idea is to have human spirit. I think human creativity is sacred. The ability to have different people with different lived experiences coming up with ideas is how good creativity happens. That's how good teams operate. It's how those unexpected ideas come out, because different people collide together and bring their different experiences together. And that's where that inductive moment happens. And I'm thrilled to see that OpenAI are investing in an amazing inductive thinker. So Johnny Ive, what an amazing human being. Such a big impact on how we use and operate the world. I think we forget that he came up with some stuff that was new for us. We didn't know that there would be a phone that could have a big glass front that would be able to press these things that work in different ways. And if you're old enough and ugly enough, like me, to have lived through that experience, I remember well the sea change of how you had to think about the role of life. That story about Tinder. I remember the process of someone showing me that you could meet people on an app. And I was like, that's never going to work. It just, because you're conditioned with the habits that you formed and the life that you lived beforehand. We now, fast forward a chunk of time, we're now in a world where we're conditioned to think, oh, well, that stuff must always have been around. But it wasn't. And who knows what's going to be around in the next 20 years. That's what's exciting. I think Johnny Ive and the people that he surrounds himself with are open to those ideas. They're welcoming in that inductive thinking. And I think that's a real sort of clear signal for businesses that inductive thinking, it's not gone away. We shouldn't be leaning on deductive responses or deductive answers. We should be pushing for those inductive thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I thought about it a lot with Apple, obviously, where a lot of Apple's innovation wasn't you were able to do things you couldn't do on other machines. It was the elegance of it, the way that it was being presented to you, and the way that it slipped so naturally into your life that it like redefined technology. Like technology beforehand was like this beige, like khaki or gray box that had edges, and it just didn't fit into any other space in your world. It was like, there's my life, and then there's like the technology over there in the room on the desk. And the thought of like, no, like, how about we design technology as if it was meant to fit in your life? It was something you would want to use and not that you need to use. And that was really the problem they solved in a sense. And it's funny, Jessica Rosenberg, who I know is a friend of both of ours, if I'm not mistaken, mentioned on this podcast that designers are problem solvers. And I thought that was a very important way to define it, because designers and creators are often thought of as like, go over there, do an art project, and if it's cool enough, like we'll use it, right? But no, like we have real problems, business problems we need to solve. We need minds that understand uncommon ways to solve problems to get to where we need to go. And I think that's really the magic, like the inductive thinking, maybe, another rephrasing of uncommon thinking, of not just, the way I was always the way I was initially skeptical of AI's, interruption into our life is the very best that AI could do is find me something that already existed. It is by definition using existing information and distilling it, like you said, deducing it or finding a path within it, but not necessarily creating something that isn't there. I think we're getting closer to that now, and I think there are ways where you are finding actual, new end results in some ways. But that was always where I felt like it couldn't actually get us there, and that's the distinction you were making. But that's where I think the role of creativity actually does solve that business problem of, I need to get somewhere that isn't already there yet, that isn't right in front of me. And creators are almost naturally inclined to find something that isn't there.
Yeah, I think we're in a weird liminal space, or like an in-between space, in my opinion. I'll talk about AI first, and then I'll talk about creativity in a whole second. But I think we're in a liminal space where some people are using the tool and are frustrated. It's not brilliant. It's not got the right answer. It's not solved the thing in one shot. I think that's a misunderstanding of the role of a tool. Just like we don't open up Photoshop and put in like a crappy photo and get an amazing photograph. You got to know how to use any tool to be able to get something good out of it. Rubbish in, rubbish out. And I think the same is true for AI. I think that the idea that AI can't do novel things, I want to make sure that I don't misrepresent my view. I think that AI is really, the AlphaFold process shows that AI can solve things that humans haven't solved yet. But they had a ton of very specialist training data, and they were putting really good input in, and they got really great output out. And I think the same is true with that whenever you're using a tool. You need to know how to use it and become a bit of a master of it, and think how it can work to help you get something fantastic out. You have to be really, really methodical about how and what are you going to do, how are you going to use a tool to get that sort of result. With the role of creativity, and I've got such admiration for Jessica anyway, and I love the point that she made on the podcast. I think that the thing that is interesting about the world of creativity right now is design thinking, I think, has kind of changed the game of the role of creative people in a business. The number of times that I have to say to the teams of people that I'll be working with, so what's our idea for this thing? And then people say, oh, well, we're going to do this workshop, and can you fill out this post-it note, and can we do this thing? And I think, yeah, but what's your idea? And I think certain creative people have got nervous to have an idea, and they think that the only way to have an idea is to go through this design thinking process. I am not I agree with that. I have a ton of respect for the ability to involve people in those processes and the ways they shine light on something. But I don't think it should be at the expense of creative people just having a point of view and having an idea. And I think we need to rebalance the scales a little bit to ensure that we have design authorship. We give design authorship the space that, in my opinion, it deserves. Because I think that's actually where you get the game-changing ideas. Design thinking is a very slow way of getting the mean average of lots of points of view. I think we need to, as a creative community, ensure that we give ourselves the grace, the confidence, the time to be the author of an idea, to take the design thinking and use it as an input to stress test what we think about something, but to use that to stress test our opinion and to stress test what we think the solution should be. So I've seen there's been a real radical change in the last sort of, I don't know, 15, 20 years, where being a designer meant people would say, this is the problem. And as a designer, you would say, great, these are the ways that we could solve your problem. Whereas now design has become such a specialism where people say, oh, I'm a user experience growth design engineer. And you're drilled down into it, like, well, great. Do you think that maybe a sticker could be the solution for this? And they say, no, that's not best practice in user experience growth design engineering. I learned that we have to this sort of module and this sort of button. I think that specialism is a bit of a curse because it stops people using design thinking to solve problems. It encourages a culture where people have solutions in their head and they've got this menu of solutions and they're just looking for problems to solve. And I think that's where we start to see a little bit of, I don't know, grayness in some of the creative communities' ability to influence big brand decisions. Brand thinking in my opinion, great brand thinking should be about understanding the business problem and using all of the tools at our disposal to understand how we can help that business solve that problem. Some of them might be aesthetic, some might be cultural, some might be political, some might be technological, but that's why I think brand building is such an important addition to any business, to make sure that we don't become hyper specialized at trying to sell people things because that's in our menu of things to sell.
It reminds me, what you're touching on now, it reminds me of like one of maybe the biggest challenges of being in-house in a tech company, especially venture-backed, where I think there's tremendous pressure to get it right on the first try all the time. You're spending other people's money. You have to tell them why you spent money in that way and what you've been working on the past 3 months to get to double their investment, et cetera. And the room for play and exploration, and I don't quite know where I'm headed, but that's okay. Like that culture and the free spiritedness, it works against business leaders who have to then go present on a slide deck all of the growth metrics that every single person and department in the company has been working towards hitting. And there are a special few who are like, we don't get to those metrics, whether that's in the short term or the long term, unless we figure out ways to solve problems that are not conventional, right? That are not just taking the smoothest, clearest template, playbook, best practices, right? That's how other people already solved problems. So by definition, we can't really follow that path or at least sustain it, right? Sustain success through an already paved path. And that's the risk. I don't purposely do this on every one of my episodes, but why I named it Believe in Brand is the act of belief is I know that I have to do something that I don't know yet, that I don't know where it takes me, and I don't have the outcome in my mind on a slide that I could show you what this gives you and where you go. But that's exactly why it's going to work. Because if I did it the other way, we're going to end up like 2 inches ahead and not, 2 miles.
Well, Ari, this is a perfect setup for me to talk about a key glib saying that I've got all the time. But before I get there and talk about weirding normal and normaling the weird stuff, we live in interesting times, don't we? I read a book recently that was documenting how Jack Welch, the CEO, had sort of killed capitalism. And it sort of talked about the way, there's a lot of the stuff that the processes that he introduced and brought in. Apparently he was a big proponent of layoffs. Layoffs weren't a big thing before Jack Welch, but he introduced a sort of this grid where managers would put people somewhere in a grid, and based on where you're in the grid, that would sort of lead to the attrition and the turnover, and that was deemed to be this really healthy way of running businesses. And in my opinion, I think that's a really unhealthy way of running businesses because we're not all the same people. And just as you said so articulately, if we are scared of doing something wrong, if we're scared of being in the lower rungs of that grid, if we think that's going to put our job at risk, if that's going to mean that maybe we won't make the cut in some sort of culture which is starting to celebrate this sort of attrition to make sure we've only got the top people in the game on our team. And that creates a culture where people will never step outside the bounds of what is the expectation. They'll always say, oh, well, this worked over here, so maybe it'll work over here. And this went up and to the right on this growth chart, so this must mean that it will go up and to the right on our growth chart. That creates this derivative culture where people stop thinking of a new solution to an old problem. I really hark back to and yearn for the days of Flash, when everyone was building websites in Flash. It was great because there was no UX really. You just had to invent new ways of thinking about how people could interact with something. And whilst there's lots to be said that's great about the semantic web and all of the stuff that's happened as a result of that, I do miss the intent and the need for the creative people to think about what's the most interesting way of creating an experience in this moment of somebody's using a tool. I'm really loving all the vibe coding stuff because you can see some of that stuff sort of creeping back as people are like, oh, well, it's like the cost for me to just play around with this new way of this interaction thing is almost zero. So I'm just going to play around with it a little bit more. And, I really welcome that sort of experimentation. But that's because it's happening with the risk is not there. Like you don't have the overarching, oh, how's this going to impact my performance in the company in this way? That's something to be celebrated in today's ecosystem right now. I think that ecosystem will undoubtedly run its course, and we'll start to have the best practice playbooks, and we'll start to have the success stories that will mean that the investors will say, well, why didn't you do it like this? Because I read this article that showed that this is the best practice way. Why were you playing around with this other thing? So before we get there, we must hold on to this moment of freedom and this moment of unknown and this blurriness, because it's a time for us to sort of experiment and play and introduce a little bit of, well, we don't know because we're just vibe coding our way through this process. But I think that management philosophy of creating people that are at the top of the pile and people that are not at the top of the pile has created a real culture of fear for people. And that culture of fear eradicates creativity. It eradicates people wanting to use creative thinking to solve something in a way that feels novel or in a way they feel emotionally rather than rationally. And that's a dangerous thing. So in any situation, and I've worked at some really, really big companies where to have big creative ideas, you have to get a good creative idea through the door, you actually have to become an expert and a master of telling stories. Like it's the storytelling around the idea, the rational, you have to understand the audience you're talking to and think about all of the rational reasons and all the reasons they're going to say no to the idea to give yourself the permission to even propose that creative thing. So any advice that I give to people that I'm working with on in that sort of situation is always spend a bunch of time thinking about all of the reasons that someone's going to say no, all the frustrations, the KPIs, the OKRs, whatever the acronym of choice is for the people that you're talking to, and work out what's the story that we need to tell, what's the stress testing we need to do of our creative idea that we might just have felt emotionally. How do we ensure that we present that emotional response with all of that rational thinking? It's not like a surefire bet to get every creative idea through, but I think it gives people a lot of reassurance when the creative people have gone through that process of stress tested their idea to address all of those questions that we think might come up or the ways that they might come up.
I want to give you the right segue because you remind me of, I got obsessed with Rory Sutherland, who wrote Alchemy. He's the Ogilvy creator, right? And
yeah. I've got Rory's book.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I love Rory.
I listened to that. I listened to him read me his own book for a good couple weeks on the way to work because his voice is awesome also. But he had some great quirky one-liners of like, one of them was like, the opposite of a good idea is also a good idea. Where like he would stress like the obsession with logic in business is what kills good ideas, because great ideas are often not logical. So if you demand logic dictates decisions, you will end up limiting yourself greatly to only the obvious and probably, and conventional, and the solving problems in the way that have already been solved, like we said before. And it creates this aversion to something that doesn't make sense, or something that hasn't been tried, or something that I can't predict what we get out of it. when I'm trying it, there's an aversion to it because of that over obsession with logic. And I think that's what caught my eye when I saw on your LinkedIn profile that your career is about weirding the normal and normalizing the weird, where we can't just keep thinking the best answer is the most normal one. It's just not how it works. So maybe describe a little of where that line came from and what that means to you.
Well, God, there's so much to say.
Oh,
The most important thing to say is I'm really basic as a human being, and I love a bit of quirky wordplay. So the title of my book, Use Design to Design Change. I just love that interplay of language. And when I can't remember why I was doing it. I think I was asked to do a talk somewhere, but I'd been asked to do something, and they asked me for my bio or how I wanted to describe like the last 20 odd years of working. And I spent ages trying to think about all of these like multi-hyphenated ways of describing me and my curiosity. And after a few really, really painfully, it's one of the most painful things that I ever have to do anyways, when I have to like think about myself like that. I feel very uncomfortable doing it. And after a lot of like pain, it always feels so braggy. Like, oh yeah, I did this, I did that. And I don't know, I just feel like there's too much bragging going on in the world. So I spoke to a few people I've worked with over the years and asked them to like tell me like honestly, like what is it that's good? What is it that's bad about James Hurst being in the room? And someone said something like, you just know how to look at really boring stuff and just think of like the weird thing. Like, how do you think of the weirdest thing? And that got me to oh my God, yeah, weirding. Like 99% of my career, like most people's career, is people come and they say the teams are really excited about the thing they're working on. But as the outsider, you look at it and you're saying, this is kind of pedestrian. What we're talking about is just like, it's a bit boring. And my job is often to think, right, well, what's the exciting hook? What's actually interesting about this thing? People have been banking for 1 million years. Why should they care about this way of banking? Or people have been buying these products for 1 million years. Why should they care about this particular product? And you're just trying to find like the weird angle into that thing. Hopefully the weird memorable angle or the weird angle that people will talk about. And so weirding the normal is the thing that I think that most of us have done for an awful lot. And every now and then people have come up and they've said, oh yeah, we've got this like crazy idea where we're going to do this thing, we're going to use this technology and it'll make people feel this way. And it's just bonkers. And you're trying to piece together in your head, how's that going to work? And my job in those situations is to try to think, okay, what's the thing that people can associate? Like, how are people going to file this in their brain? How are people going to make this feel like it's second nature or it's been around for a minute, even if it might not have been? And so that weirding the normal, normaling the weird became sort of a catchphrase that I put together for this talk that I was using, which I now use when I'm unpacking a project. I had a brief from a client just earlier on today. And my first step in working out how I was going to solve that brief is to be really clear and disciplined to myself and the team that I work with. Okay, what are we doing? Are we normaling the weird or are we weirding the normal? And let's build our idea from that point. Let's be really clear about that because it'll make a lot of the other decisions we've got to make much easier. At some point, we'll have to get the client on board and we'll have to get them to see, oh, right, okay, yes, this is, and excited about that opportunity. So that became sort of the genesis of that weird thing, and now it's become one of the many glib things that I have used. One of the things I think becomes weirder the longer you do anything is you get a bit more calcified in your way of working and how you approach problems and what you want to do or how you think you should solve a problem. I think that's the most dangerous thing. Whenever I'm saying stuff that I feel like I've said before, I try to catch myself. I don't always do it, but I try to catch myself to say, okay, James, it feels like you're just leaning on the playbook. You're sort of doing something because you think you've seen it done before. You're just using, and that's derivative. That's where it gets a bit dangerous. And so I'm always trying to push myself to try to think of how can I keep on looking at problems with fresh eyes? How can I keep on thinking what's the right framework for solving this thing? How can I avoid the temptation to sort of rinse and repeat thinking that might have worked before? But I think that's really important. And of course, like everyone, I've got crutches. There are things that I need to turn to. to do certain things because I feel really confident with them. But those sort of glib sayings, weirding the normal, normaling the weird, I always try to keep them at a level where it doesn't become a 1 + 1 = 2 rubric for solving the problem, but they're just sort of tools to help me think, okay, how am I going to look at this thing? How am I going to push myself and be disciplined about the direction that I need, the tools, the things I should be thinking about at this point in a project, rather than saying, oh, well, we use this framework that allows us to get to this canvas, that allows us to get to this solution. So I think then you get into really derivative tools.
Yeah, I think like creators are naturally like allergic to templates because I think it's almost like selling out. Like it's like, oh, I'm by definition doing something that has been done before. But the way you said when you were talking to a client, like, and you asked them, like, are you weirding the normal or are you normaling the weird? And it made me realize, like, hey, that's actually two different angles for how companies use brand. Because weirding the normal means you are a normal thing and you're trying to make it weird, which is like differentiation, right? In branding. Like, I technically am another project management software, but how am I going to weird that so that you want to buy mine and not the other ones? And then normaling the weird is like category design, where it's like, I am by definition weird. I'm foreign. You don't know why you need me, but I want to make it normal to need something that I sell. And I thought, like, ooh, that was like a nice little epiphany moment from those two perspectives. Like, hey, you got to pick one. You got to be trying to stand out in the crowd or building something brand new and shaping it. Like my journey, and I've been building the Island brand for 4 years plus now. And we're selling a browser, and pretty much everyone on earth has a browser for free. So that was a very much normaling the weird a journey for us, where we need to convince you that your free browser was not the right one. You needed one that cost you lots of money. And it was all about the story we were telling around it. And I actually thought of, you talked about quirky phrases. I loved the line that I would say at trade shows and stuff, like, your free browser is costing you millions of dollars. Just so that they're like, huh, right? And I just came back from a show in London actually last week where we had just one line on our booth, and it said, your CEO and your grandma use the same browser. Is that okay with you? And just that. And just to get people to be like, oh, yeah, that's strange. What do you guys do? And that's really at the heart of it to me as a storyteller, of like, how do I make something not normal? I like to talk about, I had a period of time where I was deep into behavioral economics, like with Daniel Kahneman and that world, where he talked about cognitive, oh shoot, I don't remember the phrase. He talked about, cognitive strain. He talked about cognitive ease and cognitive strain, where when something goes with the flow, then you don't use your brain, because your brain interprets it as, oh, this is simple. I don't need to think. And whenever something bothers you, then you move from the easy part of your brain to the hard one that needs to do calculating and observing and analysis to figure it out. And in my mind, that was like, so when people try and tell you what you want to hear, they're actually shutting your brain off. You're not thinking. But if I bother you and I get you to say, wait, what? Then I have your attention and your thinking, and I've succeeded in capturing, and creating an interaction. And that's where, like, the weirding the normal and the normaling the weird is, I need to make you bothered in a way. I need to put some strain on your brain, because if it was normal, you would just keep walking. You would just keep scrolling. And that's maybe the art of it. Yeah.
I think, well, first of all, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah.
One of my all-time go-to books. I think the thing that I, like everyone working in brand, I suspect, spend a lot of time doing, we spend so much time mapping out, like, what's the category? What are the category norms? What are the category signals? What are people doing? Then you break it down into like aesthetic buckets. So thematically, everyone looks this color. Emotionally, everyone uses these words, uses this sort of art direction. And then it's about being really smart and intentional about the decisions that you make. What are the things you need? Like, not every business can educate people about everything everywhere all the time. So what are the category levers that you can use, you can hold on to? What are the things that we're borrowing? Because we want to intentionally not get people to think about it. We want people to just say, oh, I trust it because it's using these colors, and these colors are used to convey trust everywhere else. So that's obviously the thing. Oh, but what is that thing? Like, what's the point in the brand experience? You're going to intentionally be disruptive in that thing. You're going to intentionally get people to slow down, to intentionally make a decision. And it's the fun thing actually about the Zagland is that you're working with really, really big brands. So you're trying to work out how do you encourage people to think really, really fast and then be really intentional at the point you're trying to give people a reason to decide. So being really sort of strategic at that, when the right lever to pull for that decision is. Versus with the startups where you're trying to say, listen, you are going to have to do a lot of education because this is a new word, describing a new thing in a new way that's going to solve a problem that people don't even realize they had. So there's a lot of education you're going to have to do at different levels there. And it sounds like you're having to do a lot of that with the island. And I think it's knowing how can you, like, what are the things you're borrowing then? So you're almost borrowing equity from different places and saying, okay, these are the things that people won't know how to associate with us straight away, but I think it will make it an easier journey for them to learn what type of thing we are so that we can then spend our dollars teaching them about actually what we are in these ways. And so you're using design thinking in a slightly different way to structure that narrative when people engage with the brand.
I did have a question for you because you mentioned you're working with big brands at Zag, and you've been working with big brands for a couple decades now. My experience has shown me that the bigger the brand, the greater the hesitation to be weird, right? To take a risk. There is certainly there's more corporate red tape. There is more important people at the table. There's higher stakes, right? And that tends to lead someone to feel like it's better to make a safer decision. It's better not to, take the bigger risk. First of all, have you seen that as someone who actually has worked with all these big brands? And when you're encountering that and you intuitively know, whether it's in a specific project or just in general, that those creative risks are actually where the big rewards are, what have you done to try and, help convince those stakeholders of how to think differently in that sense, or how to embrace that risk taking or that going out of the comfort zone?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like everyone, I've got best clients and worst client signals that you pick up on very, very quickly. I'll start with the worst client and then I'll talk about the best client. Actually, no, I'll talk about the best client and then I'll talk about the worst client. The best clients are the people that are hungry. They're desperate they've got everything to prove. They feel like their brand has got everything to prove. They're willing to take big swings because they feel like they're at the foot of the mountain and they are charging to go up. They've got real belief in where that up is. And they are relentless in their pursuit of what that thing is. And they'll barge through anything to get there. Those are the clients that I am always chasing after. I think they're fantastic. You can move mountains because of that passion and that commitment for the journey they're on. The clients that have a real red flag for me are the people that feel that they're at the top. And they feel like, well, we'll talk to you, James, but we're already the biggest, the best, the brightest thing. Just don't mess with us. They're the worst because they're actually really worried about coming down. They're worried about slipping. They're worried about protecting their thing. They're worried about failing or falling. And I think that, like everyone, there's always a healthy mix of both of those clients in the working week. But the tools that I use for myself to try to make sure that we are helping both of those clients. If I'm dealing with a client that feels like they're at the very top of the mountain, I'll often think about what's the burning platform? What's the stuff that's actually going to impact them? And what's the language they're going to recognize and they're going to use? I encourage everyone that I ever talk to not just think about the company you're working on, but think not just about the company and the competitors, but think about the category or culture or context more broadly. If you can understand the political ramifications, the technological ramifications, the social ramifications of the role of a brand, brands don't live in hermetically sealed bubbles. They live in the world. Understand the role of the world that's having an implication for that company. Just like your example about the island, that provocative line about the same browser that your Gran and the CEO's using. That's a great example of looking at the world that a brand lives in and making sure that we're leveraging that known thing with something they might need to know about or they might need to learn about. So if I've got a company that feels like they're or a team that feels like they're at the top of the mountain, My job is to create a bit of a sense of burning platform. Like, what's the stuff that's sort of changing? Sometimes you got to think really esoterically around how you're going to tell that story and what that story is going to be, so that they're going to sit up and listen. It doesn't always work, but that's the thing that I've learned to try to do, is read the room, work out who is going to say, no, we're already at the top of the pile. And how can you let them know that there is going to be a lot of value for them, and their opportunity for success is much greater if they're to lean in and to work with you to try to push a brave idea forwards. And then sometimes people come, the other thing can also be true though, and this often happens with the people that feel like they're at the bottom of that mountain, they've got to take big swings. They can often push for the big swingy idea, when actually the thing that you're trying to say is, whoa, 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 calm down, friends. I think that we should taper the ambition a tiny bit to make sure this is an idea that's going to land. And that's also having a bit of aesthetic intelligence and cultural awareness around the role of the brands. How do you help people that feel like they can't move anything? If the job is to have a big, bold idea, you've got to use all the tools at your disposal, the ability. The thing that I love about an art school education is you're taught to make things. You're taught to create artifacts that help tell a story. Today, with all of the AI stuff that's flying around, never has it been easier to create things to let people see, close the context gap between you and the person that you're telling a story to about what it is that matters in the story you're trying to convey at that point. On the occasional times where I've worked with people who have been often at the foot of the mountain, they feel like they're charging up, and they sort of often think that the way to get noticed is to be really, really avant-garde, or to be really crazy, or to be really disruptive in a way. Sometimes we've had to say, listen, that will obviously make a bit of noise, but that could actually be frustrating. You're missing for every dollar or every pound that you're spending that pound to disrupt something rather than educate people or onboard people or get people to know what that brand is. If you want the brand to grow, be really strategic about how you're going to spend each of those pounds. Obviously, sometimes you need to poke people in the eyes. Sometimes you need to just hold their hands and help guide them along and be really real about how you're going to do that.
Yeah, there's, I like to tap into the fact that even if they're at the top of the mountain, they started as an entrepreneur, as a founder, just like everyone at the bottom. And statistically speaking, it made no sense to travel this journey. There was way more likelihood they would fail than they would succeed. And that whole journey was a series of calculated risks from start to finish. And just because you made it to the top of the mountain doesn't mean that mindset suddenly, should be abandoned. Like, based on your experience, how you got here. You got here by being ambitious, by being a visionary, by seeing what other people aren't seeing and pursuing it, even, against everyone's, against all odds. And brand, doing brand right requires having that same level of entrepreneurial ambition of I see things others don't see. I want to convince people, that they should be seeing it too. And it's hard because they have to believe it, and they have to put money down, and they have to, invest in that. But I do think there's a brand builder in everyone. They just have to kind of pull it out of themselves.
Well, I think it's also incumbent on all of us I think founders, there are different flavors of founders, obviously, but there are also different flavors of business. So founder-led businesses tend to have stewards of that business who really believe in the cause, they set out to change something. They really believed in something enough to take a really difficult route to travel. If they've had some success, that can make them really easy to work with, or sometimes less easy to work with. But there's the spirit of founder-led businesses, which I think is really intoxicating and enjoyable to work with. Founders then often, or as businesses scale, they often hire a lot of people as managers. And I think it's sort of a layer of people that get hired to manage bits of the business that are incentivized to de-risk stuff for the business. So founders traditionally, in many cases, tend to always be pushing, how can we push? How can we go further? How can we go farther? Because they understand how to be really scrappy with the little that they've had in the past. Whereas often managers can focus on, okay, well, how can we make sure this is really, really reliable? How can we make sure this is going to stand the test of time? And I actually think a healthy business understands how to navigate those two different viewpoints and understands how to choreograph those two different viewpoints, because each of them on their own makes a very, very dangerous business or makes a very sort of unpredictable business. But those two mindsets working in harmony and understanding how to work together, those are the businesses I've seen have such great success and scale so successfully, because founders have understood how to interact and work with those people that they've hired, whose job is to say, listen, that's a great idea, but, and understand how to manage that process, whilst the leadership teams or the managers that they've hired understand how to hear the provocative, big swinging, big idea and understand, okay, there are bits of this that we actually need to make happen. This is going to keep the magic of this business going. This is going to have an outsized impact if we can keep this story alive. So I think it's the interplay of when you're a brand, that one of the many things I love about being the brand person is you're often there are 3 inflection points in a business that I think I have often been brought into to help do stuff, to answer brand questions. Occasionally, when brands are first starting, if a founding team have got had a bit of experience, they tend to bring a brand person in to try and give them a really good foundation. So occasionally you get to help shape the thing when it's right at the very beginning of start of their journey. More often than not, it's at a point of adaptation. It's either the product has reached a stage of maturity, or the audience size has reached a stage of maturity, or the technology has reached a stage of maturity, or the culture has reached a stage of maturity. Stuff's happened. They need to adapt. And so they say, who's going to help us adapt something? And that's where the brand needs to evolve and think. And the third one is scaling. When people hit often it's post-funding rounds, usually in West Coast America, but when businesses reach a certain maturity and they just need to scale, they need to have singular ways of talking to more people. They'll often bring brand people in to help them work out, well, how do we scale this stuff? How do we scale this intent? How do we scale the ability for us to tell our stories? This is it's not always true, but I think there's a big chunk of the people that I've worked with have been at one of those key inflection points. So I think being a creative person is just being really mindful about, okay, what's the inflection point of the business? And am I helping the business adapt, where you've got to go in with a very different set of tools, a very different set of, you play a very different role than if you're helping a business scale. There's a very different set of questions you'll need to ask and answer, and a very different set of tools you'll end up delivering to help them achieve that.
Oh, that's a great framework. And yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. We're hitting almost an hour. I'd love to wrap up with, you mentioned, you're doing some teaching now. You're deep into AI. Everyone's talking about it, but you seem to really have a great perspective. I'd love to hear, just to round out the conversation, is there something that people aren't understanding about how to use AI in their workflow, or how to consider the role of AI? Maybe people are getting it wrong, or underestimating it, or kind of thinking about it in a way that they can be doing a lot more with it, or are missing the point. What is your message to the people who are kind of staring at AI and say, what should I be doing with this thing in terms of driving a business, especially when it comes to branding and creativity?
Firstly, AI, huge topic. I teach a 12-week course, and we barely scratch the surface of the topic. I don't want to be glib. I'm totally aware of the implications of AI, the conversations around the ethics of what it's been trained on, the amount of water that it consumes, the environmental impact. Those are really, really big things. And I'm really keen to stay abreast of that. I want to be really aware of those conversations. I think it's really important that we stay aware of those conversations, so that I think we all have to make our own decisions about where it feels right and where we feel like it's not right, especially right now. In terms of the role of AI in creativity, I think people fall into a couple of camps. There are the people that have heard or have sort of made very strong decisions based on some of the red flags that people have been talking about with AI. Then you have the people at the other end who say, oh my God, you can use AI for everything, and AI is going to be the thing that does everything. I'm not in either of those camps. One of the things that I find most frustrating about the world of AI right now, if I look at LinkedIn, the one social network that I still have in my life, the thing that really, really is a trigger warning for me are when I see those posts from people that say, OMG, this prompt lets me write 50 headlines in 3 seconds. Like, give me a star emoji and I'll send it to you. Let's just not engage with those people. Like, A, why are they always men? B, why are they celebrating interesting. The fact that they found something that's going to develop a bunch of slop, like that's AI at its absolute worst. That's just quantity over quality. For one, I haven't done that much digging into who those people are, but I'd be surprised if they've done work that's fantastic. And I think they're just giving AI creativity a really, really bad name. AI at its best is somewhere in the middle. It's the people that know and are aware of the issues and the considerations and are making the right decisions. There are lots of great tools that have been trained in ethical ways. There are ways you can offset the environmental impact and be really mindful about the impact that you're having and the way that you're using the tools. And then I think it becomes a really powerful unlock. The way that I use AI is just as a tool. I use it to do derivative work. If I just want to understand the mean average of what people think about an idea, I'll use a large language model to say, what do people think about XYZ product? And then it'll give me the thing. That's not because I want to use that or even share it. It's just me just doing a bit of research, working out like, where does the land lie in this space so that I can start to use my brain to think about the things that either deviate. If I'm going to weird the normal, how do I do that? If I'm going to normal the weird, how do I do that? Like, and how do I use that as a bit of research to get me into that conversation? The other key way is if I'm creating artifacts to tell people a story about something, like lots of people, I spend countless hours just giving presentations for ideas to try to unlock budgets for me to go and do things. The ability to now show really realistic mocks of a thing or comps of a thing, rather than using swipe that I found to explain my idea, I often create a story using imagery that is really clearly underscoring the points that I want to tell in my story. And I've seen it have a massive difference in how people understand the thinking that I'm sharing. Stuff becomes a little bit less ambiguous. And I have used, but the teaching that I do is under this name Rogue School. I built I'm not a web developer. I've got many friends that are fantastic web developers. But I built the entire Rogue School website just by doing this vibe coding thing. It's really painful. It's so many times you spend hours like writing these inane prompts trying to do something. But then stuff comes together, and I think it's magical. Whilst I suspect that there are lots and lots of things, if real web developer were to look at the back end of how Rogue School is built, it's shambolic. It's got to be shambolic. I've not looked at that. But if you're a creative person and you want to you have been limited in the things you can go away and create, I think it's a really powerful tool to unlock how you can go away and you can do something. You can bring an idea to life. And I think that's where AI isn't, I think the conversation is a little bit binary at the moment in some corners of the world around the role of AI and what AI is going to be. In my opinion, it's a really, really powerful tool, and it's incumbent on all of us to understand how to harness the tool and use the tool. And if we don't show how we're leading with the tool, I don't think AI is going to take our job, but I do think people that use AI are probably going to be more competitive if I were looking at two CVs, the person that knows how to scale their impact or be more efficient in the way they're working or be more exploratory in the way they're going to show ideas, that's going to be a candidate that's going to stand a few degrees in front of a candidate who says, no, I'm never going to use AI. I think AI is not going to work. And I think that's something that I'd be really mindful of, is be aware that the conversation isn't the binary, AI is going to do design. I don't think that's true. But I do think that use AI are going to be the people that will keep on doing design.
Yeah, very well said. It's such a hot topic. Like I think of AI usage as like the middle 60%. Like if it's replacing your initial ideation, where like you mentioned, like just LinkedIn bros who just say like, hey, you don't have to think and you could sound smart. Like, no, I don't think you get it, right? I don't think you get what this tool is for. And if you also think that it's going to give you the finished asset, no, like you need to then work with it and get it to where it needs to go, because by definition, it's just giving you either, an exact calculation of what it thinks you said, or just, like you said, very deductively producing something based on the best practices of the universe of what they would have made, collectively based on what you're asking it. And you don't want that. You want the version of it that's exactly, you. So it's like, you need to be there the first 20% and the last 20%, but it's magic how fast you could get through that 60%. I also think it's enriching the ideation part, like you said, how quickly I can add context and add information that my limited brain wouldn't be able to access in the initial ideation stage of something, and now it could be a way more informed idea. It could be way more, have more depth to it and more understanding. And the mock-up use case to me, all agency people will know how valuable that is, that showing a business person, a business leader, helping them visualize a concept as opposed to describing it to them when their imagination is nowhere near where yours is, by no fault of their own. It's a game changer. And I think it's going to unlock a lot more budget, I hope, because of that ability. That's really great. Any last words? I know there's probably 3 more podcasts we should do, and maybe we'll have to meet up again and do it sometime soon. But any last thing to plug or to add to this?
Oh, well, the most important thing is, Ari, thank you so much for putting together the podcast, keeping it going. It's conversation. Like, the thing that I love about the creative community is that word community. I think it's important that all of us keep on talking, that we're not an industry that's fixed. We're an industry that's always in flux. We should always be changing and always be evolving. So from the bottom of my heart, just thank you for keeping this going. I think it's a fantastic podcast, and it's an honor to be here.
I appreciate it. And I think this episode is like a testament to what you just said of like why this is such a valuable thing to just have these conversations in public and create these connections, because this conversation wouldn't be happening without the podcast. This is how we connected. And I thank you for that, for making that connection and for, taking the time to have this conversation. I look forward to keeping that up in the future. Appreciate it, James.